Loud music shattered as Yoon Ha-rin hit the marble floor, her phone skidding through spilled champagne toward a stranger's forgotten business card. Neon lights pulsed crimson and electric blue across the polished tiles, reflecting in the broken glass scattered around her as the bass from oversized speakers rattled every table inside the VIP lounge. Someone laughed. Someone else lifted a phone to record. The smell of expensive whiskey mixed with burned tobacco and perfume hung thick in the warm air while security guards in tailored black suits watched without moving a single step. Ha-rin pressed both hands against the cold stone floor, trying to push herself upright, but the instant she shifted her weight, pain shot through her legs so violently that her fingers slipped against the wet surface. Her breath caught. The white heel she had worn only an hour earlier now rested several feet away beside an overturned chair. "Stay down," a broad-shouldered bouncer muttered without raising his voice, adjusting the cuff of his jacket as though nothing unusual had happened. A young man wearing an expensive designer watch leaned back on the velvet couch, swirling amber liquor inside a crystal glass. "She should have minded her own business," he said, drawing another round of amused chuckles from the people around him. No one offered a hand. No one even looked embarrassed. The music climbed louder, swallowing every sound except the relentless pulse vibrating beneath Ha-rin's palms. She reached toward her purse with trembling fingers. The leather strap had snapped. Lipstick, receipts, loose bills, and her phone lay scattered beneath the flashing lights. Every inch forward scraped her sleeves across tiny fragments of broken glass, their rough edges catching against the fabric. Her phone screen flickered weakly. A crack stretched across one corner, but it still responded when her thumb brushed against it. She opened her contacts through blurred vision, intending to call her older sister. The screen jumped after another vibration from the speakers. Her thumb struck the wrong name. She never noticed. Around her, waiters quietly cleared expensive bottles while pretending not to see her. One hostess glanced over before quickly lowering her eyes. Rules inside Eclipse Club were simple. VIP guests always came first. Employees who interfered rarely returned the following week. Ha-rin tasted blood where she had bitten the inside of her cheek, swallowed once, and forced her shaking thumb across the keyboard. "They broke my leg. Please help me." She stared at the message for barely half a second before pressing send. The screen dimmed. She exhaled, believing the words were racing toward the only person she trusted. Across the city, nearly 8 miles away, another phone vibrated once inside the silent back seat of a black armored sedan. The interior smelled faintly of cedar leather and fresh espresso. Soft dashboard lights outlined the profile of Kang Tae-jun, whose charcoal overcoat remained perfectly pressed despite the late hour. Outside, Seoul's traffic rolled beneath glowing bridges and towering glass buildings. Inside the vehicle, only the hum of the engine disturbed the silence. His chief of security was halfway through reviewing tomorrow's schedule when the unexpected notification appeared on Tae-jun's private phone, a number known by fewer than a dozen people. He glanced down. The message contained only 6 words. "They broke my leg. Please help me." Tae-jun read it once. Then again. He did not reply. He simply looked through the windshield, his expression unchanged, before quietly saying 4 words that made every man inside the vehicle stop breathing. "Turn the car around." The sedan cut across 3 empty lanes, its tires whispering over rain-dark asphalt while white LED streetlights streaked across the tinted windows like silent flashes of lightning. No sirens. No flashing escorts. Only 4 identical black SUVs slipped into formation behind Kang Tae-jun's vehicle, each engine humming with disciplined precision. Inside, nobody reached for a phone. Nobody questioned the sudden change of route. They had learned years ago that Tae-jun never reversed direction without reason. He unlocked the cracked message once more, studying the 6 words under the pale glow of the screen before locking the phone again. "Find the sender," he said. His voice barely rose above the quiet air conditioner. "Alive." The man seated beside him nodded once and opened a secured tablet. Fingers moved rapidly across encrypted software while satellite maps, traffic cameras, and cellular towers flickered across the display. A tiny blue dot appeared near the Han River Entertainment District. "Signal is still active," the security chief reported. "Eclipse Club." Tae-jun looked through the windshield without changing expression. "How long?" 9 minutes. 5. The convoy accelerated. Outside, cold night air drifted through an alley behind Eclipse Club where the back entrance stood half open beside overflowing trash bins that smelled of stale beer and bleach. 2 employees wheeled expensive liquor crates toward a delivery truck, laughing about the night's VIP guests while pretending not to notice Ha-rin sitting against a concrete wall less than 30 feet away. A folded staff apron rested beneath her injured leg. Someone had finally moved her outside because customers inside had complained that she was ruining the atmosphere. Her breathing came slowly through clenched teeth. Every few moments she unlocked her phone, expecting her sister's name to appear across the screen. Nothing. The message remained marked as delivered. No reply. A light breeze carried the distant sound of traffic and the faint aroma of grilled meat from late-night restaurants across the street, painfully ordinary against everything happening around her. She searched her contacts again, and only then did her thumb freeze. The conversation she had opened did not belong to her sister. Above the message sat a single unfamiliar name. Kang Tae-jun. She frowned, trying to remember where she had ever seen it. The profile contained no photo, no history, only one old business contact imported months earlier after helping organize paperwork for a corporate event. She had never spoken to him. Her pulse quickened as she realized the mistake. She pressed call. The line rang once before disconnecting. She tried again. This time it never connected. She lowered the phone, staring at the shattered glass across the screen as though it might somehow rewrite what had already happened. Near the entrance, one of the bouncers spotted her still holding the phone. He walked over slowly, the heavy soles of his boots scraping against rough concrete. "Didn't they tell you to leave?" he asked. Ha-rin slipped the phone into her coat pocket and braced one hand against the wall, forcing herself upright despite the sharp tremor running through her injured leg. "I'm waiting for someone." The bouncer smirked, glanced toward the empty street, then leaned close enough for the scent of cigarette smoke to drift between them. "Nobody's coming." He reached toward her pocket. Before his hand could touch the fabric, a low chorus of engines rolled through the block. Headlights swept across brick walls and reflective windows, washing the alley in cold white light. 4 black SUVs stopped without a sound, perfectly aligned across the entrance to Eclipse Club. Every employee turned. Every conversation ended. The rear door of the lead sedan opened, and Kang Tae-jun stepped onto the pavement, adjusted one black glove, looked directly at the bouncer, and spoke only one sentence. "Take your hand off her." Kang Tae-jun did not raise his voice. He did not take another step. Under the hard white glow of the SUV's headlights, his polished black shoes remained perfectly still against the damp pavement while the faint scent of engine oil drifted through the alley. The bouncer slowly withdrew his hand from Ha-rin's coat, forcing a crooked smile that never reached his eyes. "Sir, this doesn't concern you." No one answered. The only sound came from cooling engines ticking beneath their hoods and the distant pulse of music still leaking through the club's steel service door. Ha-rin gripped the rough brick wall beside her until her knuckles turned pale. She looked from the strangers in tailored black coats to the unfamiliar man standing at their center, still unable to understand why he had come. Tae-jun's gaze settled briefly on her injured leg before returning to the bouncer. "Who did this?" he asked. The question landed softly, yet every employee standing nearby lowered their eyes. The bouncer hesitated. "She caused trouble inside." Tae-jun neither argued nor accepted the answer. Instead, he extended one gloved hand toward his security chief. A slim tablet was placed into his palm. He tapped the screen once, then turned it toward the club's security manager, who had hurried into the alley with sweat shining beneath the fluorescent lights. "Show me the camera recording from 1 hour ago," Tae-jun said. The manager swallowed. "The system, it's under maintenance." Tae-jun closed the tablet without another word. Then we'll watch it another way. Before anyone could react, one of his men walked past the frozen employees, pushed open the heavy service door, and disappeared inside the building. Two more followed without rushing, moving with quiet precision through the flashing corridors of Eclipse Club. Nobody tried to stop them. Inside, music thundered beneath spinning lasers, the dance floor shimmering beneath violet lights and drifting clouds of artificial smoke. Bartenders paused in the middle of pouring drinks. Waitresses stopped carrying trays. Customers looked up as the black-suited men crossed the room without speaking to anyone. One disappeared into the surveillance office. Another calmly unplugged the DJ's sound system. The music died in an instant. Silence crashed over hundreds of people more loudly than the speakers ever had. Glasses stopped halfway to waiting lips. Conversations froze. Every eye turned toward the entrance as Kang Tae-jun walked into the club with measured steps, the polished marble floor reflecting the glow of crystal chandeliers above him. Ha-rin remained outside with two medical specialists from the convoy, who carefully secured her injured leg with an inflatable splint before lifting her onto a stretcher. Cool night air brushed across her face while the smell of disinfectant replaced stale alcohol. As the ambulance doors closed, she caught one last glimpse through the open entrance. The same VIP guests who had laughed earlier now stood in complete silence. Their confident smiles had vanished. 10 minutes later, a security technician emerged from the surveillance office carrying a portable hard drive. He handed it directly to Tae-jun without saying a word. The footage began playing across the tablet. Bright club lights. The crowded VIP lounge. Ha-rin stepping between an intoxicated customer and a frightened young hostess. A careless shove. Another shove after she refused to move. Her fall against the marble floor. The designer shoe sliding away. The bouncer standing still. The laughter. Nobody helped. Tae-jun watched the entire recording without blinking. When the final frame faded, he locked the screen and slipped the tablet back into his coat. The room remained utterly silent, broken only by the soft hum of air conditioning drifting from hidden ceiling vents. Then he looked at the club owner, whose expensive suit suddenly seemed far too tight beneath the golden lights. From this moment forward, Tae-jun said, no one leaves this building until I decide what happens to it. The ambulance doors closed with a muted metallic thud, sealing out the nightclub's fading lights as cool air drifted from the ceiling vents carrying the sharp scent of antiseptic. White fluorescent panels glowed above Yoon Ha-rin while the paramedic tightened the brace around her injured leg with careful hands, securing thick gray straps until they no longer shifted against the fabric of her jeans. A heart monitor chirped steadily beside her, its green line moving across the screen in quiet rhythm as Seoul streets blurred beyond the rear windows. She reached into her coat and stared once more at the conversation on her cracked phone. There were still only her 6 desperate words. No reply. She slowly turned her head toward the rear doors just before they shut completely and caught a final glimpse of Kang Tae-jun standing motionless beneath the club's entrance lights. He never looked toward the ambulance. He simply remained where he was, surrounded by silent men in black suits while no one inside Eclipse Club dared move without permission. 20 minutes later, the ambulance disappeared into the underground entrance of a private medical center. Warm air rushed through spotless hallways smelling of disinfectant and fresh coffee as nurses guided the stretcher beneath bright surgical lights. A physician examined the scans, adjusted his glasses, and nodded once. The fracture is clean, he said quietly. She'll need surgery, but she'll walk again. Before Ha-rin could ask about insurance or paperwork, another nurse entered carrying a tablet. Everything has already been authorized. By who? The doctor asked. The nurse glanced briefly toward the hallway. The gentleman who brought her. No further explanation followed. Outside the operating floor, polished elevator doors slid open without a sound. Kang Tae-jun stepped inside the waiting area alone, his shoes making almost no noise against the stone floor. Through the glass wall he watched nurses wheel Ha-rin toward surgery. She looked up just once. Their eyes met through 2 layers of glass before the doors closed between them. She raised her hand slightly, uncertain whether she was offering thanks or simply trying to understand why a complete stranger had crossed half the city because of a message she had never meant to send. Tae-jun gave the smallest nod, then turned away before another word could be exchanged. An hour later he returned to Eclipse Club. The music never resumed. The chandeliers still glowed warmly above untouched drinks, now watered down by melting ice, while the faint smell of expensive liquor lingered across the silent room. Customers had been escorted outside. Employees stood shoulder to shoulder near the entrance, speaking only in whispers. The owner waited beside the empty bar, constantly wiping invisible dust from his sleeves. Tae-jun walked slowly through the building, his fingertips brushing polished oak, velvet booths, brass railings, and marble columns as though memorizing every inch of the place. He stopped in the center of the dance floor and looked upward toward the mirrored ceiling reflecting hundreds of tiny lights. "Everyone is out?" he asked. His security chief checked an earpiece. "The building is clear. Staff, guests, kitchen, maintenance. Every floor." Tae-jun slipped both hands into the pockets of his overcoat. The room settled into complete silence except for the quiet hum of refrigeration units behind the bar. The club owner finally found his voice. "Mr. Kang, whatever compensation she deserves, I'll pay it." "Name the amount." Tae-jun turned slowly. "This stopped being about money the moment your people decided a human being was less important than your customers." He looked once more across the lavish room, then toward the glowing exit sign above the front doors. "No one enters this building after sunrise," he said. "At exactly 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, Eclipse Club will no longer exist." At dawn arrived without warmth. A pale ribbon of light crept across Seoul's skyline while Eclipse Club stood dark and silent, its towering glass facade reflecting an empty street instead of crowds waiting behind velvet ropes. The neon sign had been switched off before sunrise, leaving only the faint buzz of electrical transformers and the distant rumble of delivery trucks echoing between neighboring buildings. Yellow barricades stretched across the block, and every entrance had been unlocked and left wide open. Inside, the air still carried traces of expensive perfume, polished wood, stale champagne, and smoke trapped in velvet curtains after years of late nights. Every table remained exactly where it had been left. Crystal glasses still rested beside untouched bottles. The dance floor, once vibrating beneath thousands of footsteps, lay perfectly still beneath rows of silent chandeliers. Kang Tae-jun stepped through the main entrance alone. His black overcoat moved gently with the cool draft drifting through the open doors, and the soft click of his shoes against marble echoed through the vacant hall. His security team remained outside. This was not a meeting that required weapons. It required witnesses. The club owner stood waiting near the center of the empty room, his expensive tie loosened, his eyes fixed on the floor as though avoiding even a glance might somehow change the morning ahead. Around him gathered department managers, security supervisors, bartenders, hosts, cleaners, and the same bouncer who had reached toward Ha-rin in the alley only hours earlier. No music filled the silence now. Only the quiet hum of emergency lights and the occasional creak of cooling metal from the ceiling vents interrupted the stillness. Tae-jun walked slowly across the polished floor, stopping where the surveillance recording had shown Ha-rin falling onto the marble. He looked down for several seconds before lifting his eyes toward the people assembled before him. "Remember this place," he said evenly. "Not because it made money. Because this is where every person in the room decided that entertainment mattered more than another human being." No one answered. The owner swallowed and stepped forward, holding out a thick envelope with both hands. "Mr. Kang, this is only the first payment. We can rebuild her life. We can cover every medical bill, every lost paycheck. Tell me what it takes." Tae-jun did not even look at the envelope. "You still think this has a price?" The owner slowly lowered his hands. A cold breeze drifted through the open entrance, stirring loose cocktail napkins across the floor. Outside, several utility workers disconnected electrical service while maintenance crews shut off the building's gas supply under the supervision of Tae-jun's men. Fire engines waited 2 blocks away as a precaution, their crews standing by in reflective jackets beneath the growing morning light. Everything unfolded with careful planning rather than chaos. Every neighboring building had already been cleared. Every safety inspection had been completed. Every legal notice had been delivered. Nothing about what was about to happen would endanger anyone beyond the walls of Eclipse Club. Tae-jun turned toward the front doors and gave a single nod. Workers rolled in heavy demolition equipment and began removing valuable artwork, liquor, electronics, and anything that could be safely salvaged before the structure itself would be condemned. Chandeliers disappeared one by one. Velvet curtains came down. The giant illuminated logo above the dance floor was lowered onto padded crates. Piece by piece, the glamorous image that had hidden so much indifference vanished into waiting trucks. The owner watched in silence as the identity of his business was dismantled before his eyes. It was not destruction born from rage. It was deliberate, methodical erasure. Tae-jun waited until the final worker stepped outside. Then he looked once toward the empty dance floor where laughter had echoed only hours before. "Begin," he said quietly. Outside, the first hydraulic machines rolled forward as steel barriers locked into place around the block, and the ground trembled beneath their engines. Here is part 6, continuing seamlessly from the previous section. Edit. The first hydraulic arm pushed forward with a deep metallic groan, its steel teeth pressing against the vacant entrance as morning sunlight spread across the glass facade in pale gold. Dust drifted through the cool air while workers in reflective helmets stood behind reinforced barriers, radios crackling softly above the distant murmur of gathered spectators. Across the street, reporters raised cameras but remained outside the restricted perimeter. No one shouted. No one celebrated. The only sounds were engines idling, warning beepers echoing between neighboring buildings, and the slow collapse of a reputation built over years. Kang Tae-jun stood several yards away with both hands resting inside his coat pockets, watching without expression as the enormous machine peeled away the illuminated sign that had welcomed thousands of wealthy guests. The letters crashed onto a waiting flatbed with a hollow clang that echoed through the empty block. Inside the medical center, warm afternoon light filtered through white curtains, leaving soft rectangles across the polished floor. Yoon Ha-rin lay propped against her hospital bed, her injured leg secured inside a rigid brace while the steady rhythm of an IV pump quietly filled the room. She reached for the remote and switched on the television more to escape the silence than from curiosity. Every major station carried the same live image. Helicopter footage circled above Eclipse Club, showing heavy equipment dismantling the structure piece by piece. Reporters spoke rapidly, pointing toward the expanding cloud of concrete dust as emergency crews remained stationed nearby to monitor safety. Ha-rin leaned closer, the blanket rustling beneath her fingertips. She recognized the entrance where she had fallen, the marble staircase where people had walked past without stopping, and the alley where she had believed no one would ever come. Her phone rested beside the bed. The cracked screen still displayed the 6 words she had accidentally sent. Nothing more had been added. Yet the city outside her window was changing because of them. Back at the site, the final support beams inside the main hall had already been cleared. Utility inspectors confirmed every line had been disconnected. Fire officers completed one last walkthrough before stepping beyond the safety zone. Tae-jun accepted a clipboard, signed a single page authorizing the final phase, and handed it back without looking down. "Everyone accounted for?" he asked. "Every worker. Every employee. Every visitor," his security chief replied after checking the roster one final time. Tae-jun gave a brief nod. "Proceed." A warning horn sounded 3 times, each blast rolling across the nearly empty district. The demolition crews withdrew. Heavy machinery pushed forward again, and the weakened exterior surrendered with a deafening rumble. Glass burst outward in glittering sheets that landed inside the secured perimeter. Concrete folded inward instead of outward exactly as engineers had planned. Thick gray dust billowed into the air, swallowing the once famous entrance until only the silhouettes of excavators remained visible through the haze. Within minutes the glamorous nightclub that had dominated the entertainment district existed only as broken steel, shattered concrete, and scattered fragments of polished stone. No flames leaped toward the sky, yet every news headline would describe the event the same way before sunset. They would say Kang Tae-jun had burned the club to the ground because, to the public, no difference existed between reducing an empire to ashes with fire or erasing it so completely that nothing recognizable remained. He watched the dust settle without triumph, then turned away before the last wall collapsed. His phone vibrated once inside his pocket. He glanced at the screen. It was the same conversation that had begun everything. For the first time, his thumb moved across the display. Only 3 words appeared beneath her original message. "You're safe now." Edit morning traffic slowly returned to the district, but every driver eased off the accelerator when they passed the empty lot where Eclipse Club had stood only hours before. Fine gray dust still drifted through the cool air, settling across twisted steel and broken concrete while the smell of damp cement lingered behind temporary fencing. Television vans lined the opposite curb, their satellite dishes pointed toward the sky as reporters spoke into microphones with the ruined skyline filling the frame behind them. Across every station, the same images repeated again and again. Helicopter footage of the demolition. The silent convoy. The famous nightclub disappearing beneath rolling clouds of dust. By noon, another story began pushing aside the spectacle itself. Police investigators, insurance inspectors, and financial regulators entered the secured site carrying sealed evidence containers instead of cameras. Metal filing cabinets recovered before the demolition were loaded into government vehicles. Computer servers, cash ledgers, security logs, employee records, and storage lockers disappeared one by one beneath numbered evidence tags. Nobody from Kang Tae-jun's organization interfered. His men simply stepped aside as officials carried everything away under the bright summer sun. At the medical center, Ha-rin rested against an elevated pillow while afternoon light spilled across the polished floor in long golden rectangles. The television remained muted, subtitles scrolling beneath footage of investigators moving through stacks of recovered materials. She picked up the remote, then lowered it again when a nurse quietly entered with fresh flowers and a neatly folded newspaper. The front page carried a single aerial photograph of the demolished club beside another headline beneath it. Authorities expand investigation after evidence recovered from entertainment venue. Ha-rin slowly unfolded the paper. Page after page described suspended business licenses, financial audits, witness interviews, and multiple arrests connected to activities that had allegedly operated behind the nightclub's polished exterior. She stopped reading and looked toward the window where sunlight reflected from distant office towers. Her phone vibrated softly on the bedside table. There was no long conversation waiting for her, only the same brief reply she had received earlier. "You're safe now." She read it twice before locking the screen. Several miles away, Kang Tae-jun stood inside a quiet conference room overlooking the Han River. Warm light reflected across the dark walnut table while fresh coffee steamed beside untouched documents. One television mounted on the wall carried the same breaking news coverage seen throughout the city. His security chief muted the broadcast. "The investigation has taken over," he said. "Everything recovered from the building is now in official custody." Tae-jun closed the folder in front of him without opening it. "Good. The media believes you destroyed the club because of revenge." Tae-jun looked through the floor-to-ceiling glass toward the river flowing below. "People may believe whatever they choose." He reached for his phone, opened the short conversation with Ha-rin one final time, then placed it face down on the table. Outside the conference room, several associates waited for instructions that never came. Instead of issuing new orders, Tae-jun stood, buttoned his coat, and walked toward the elevator. Behind him, the television continued showing the empty lot where music, laughter, and indifference had existed less than a day earlier. Ahead of him, another destination waited. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and he stepped inside carrying nothing except a single white hospital visitor's pass. The hospital corridor was almost silent except for the soft wheels of a passing medication cart and the distant chime of an elevator arriving on another floor. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through frosted windows, warming the pale walls with a faint golden glow while the clean scent of antiseptic mixed with fresh flowers left by earlier visitors. Yoon Ha-rin sat upright beside the window, her injured leg resting inside a rigid brace. A physical therapist had helped her stand for the first time that morning, and a pair of aluminum crutches now leaned quietly against the chair beside her bed. The effort had left tiny beads of sweat along her forehead and faint creases in the blanket where her hands had gripped the fabric, yet she had taken 3 careful steps before lowering herself back onto the mattress. A gentle knock interrupted the stillness. The door opened, and Kang Tae-jun entered alone, dressed in the same charcoal overcoat, carrying nothing except a small white envelope. He closed the door behind him without haste, the latch clicking softly through the quiet room. Neither of them spoke immediately. Outside the window, traffic flowed across the bridge in long ribbons of silver and red while sunlight shimmered across the Han River below. Ha-rin broke the silence first. "I never meant to send that message to you." Tae-jun glanced at the cracked phone resting on the bedside table. "I know." She reached toward it, turning the damaged screen in her hands. "I thought I was texting my sister." Instead, he replied, "You reached someone who was able to answer." She lowered her eyes for a moment before looking back at him. "You destroyed an entire club because of 6 words." Tae-jun walked toward the window and looked out across the city. The glass reflected both of them against the fading daylight. "Not because of 6 words," he said quietly. "Because those 6 words described something everyone else chose to ignore." He placed the white envelope on the bedside table. Inside were hospital documents showing every expense had been settled in advance, along with a simple business card bearing only his name and a private number. No titles. No company logo. No instructions. Ha-rin traced the edge of the card with her fingertips but did not pick it up. "I don't know how to repay you." Tae-jun slowly shook his head. "You already have." She looked at him with quiet confusion. He met her gaze for the first time since entering the room. "Most people spend years trying to reach me through money, influence, or fear. You reached me by asking for help." The room fell silent again. Warm light continued drifting across the polished floor while the monitor beside her bed kept its calm, steady rhythm. Tae-jun adjusted one cuff beneath his coat sleeve and turned toward the door. His hand rested briefly on the handle before he stopped. Without looking back, he spoke one final sentence. "When you can walk out of this hospital on your own, leave everything that happened behind you. No one will trouble you again." He opened the door. Cool hallway air slipped into the room as distant footsteps echoed beyond the threshold. Ha-rin looked down once more at the conversation on her phone. Her desperate message remained at the top, followed by only 4 words from the man now disappearing into the corridor. "You're safe now." She tightened her grip on the phone, lifted her eyes toward the doorway, and called after him for the first time. "Mr. Kang." He stopped but did not turn around. "Thank you, for believing me when nobody else did." Several seconds passed. Then, with his back still facing her, Kang Tae-jun gave a single quiet nod before walking away, leaving the unopened door gently swaying behind him as the evening light slowly filled the empty doorway. At 3 months later, crisp autumn air carried the scent of roasted chestnuts through a quiet neighborhood park as golden leaves drifted across the sidewalk beneath Yoon Ha-rin's careful footsteps. A slim carbon fiber cane tapped gently against the pavement, more from habit than necessity. Children laughed near a fountain, pigeons fluttered into the cool afternoon sunlight, and somewhere across the street a musician played a soft melody on an old violin. Ha-rin paused beside the water, shifted her weight onto both feet, and slowly folded the cane before slipping it into her shoulder bag. For the first time since that night, she stood without hesitation. Her phone vibrated softly. A news notification appeared across the screen. Authorities confirmed the final legal closure of every business license connected to the former Eclipse Club. Civil lawsuits had been settled. Criminal charges against those responsible for assault and negligence had moved through the courts. The vacant lot where the nightclub had once towered would soon become a public community center funded by private donations made anonymously. Ha-rin smiled faintly before locking the screen. She never learned who signed the largest contribution. She already knew the answer. Across the city, Kang Tae-jun stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office as evening settled over the Han River. The skyline shimmered beneath thousands of lights, reflected across polished stone and dark glass while a cup of untouched coffee cooled beside a stack of unopened reports. His security chief entered quietly and placed a folder on the desk. "The last case connected to the club is finished," he said. "There is nothing left." Tae-jun rested one hand on the folder but never opened it. Instead, he picked up the cracked phone that had been replaced weeks earlier by Ha-rin's new device. She had insisted he keep the old one after technicians recovered her data. The fractured screen still displayed the first message exactly as it had arrived that night. "They broke my leg. Please help me." He looked at it for a long moment, then carefully placed it inside a wooden drawer and closed it without another word. Some messages were never meant to be erased. Several days later, Ha-rin accepted a position managing guest services at a non-profit cultural center, a place filled with sunlight, music, and families instead of flashing lights and locked VIP rooms. During the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new community center built on the former nightclub property, she stood quietly among the crowd wearing a simple navy coat while children ran across the open courtyard that had replaced polished marble and velvet ropes. There were trees where luxury cars had once lined the curb. Benches stood where security guards had once turned people away. Laughter echoed through open space instead of trapped walls. She noticed a familiar black sedan slowing briefly at the intersection across the street. The tinted rear window lowered only an inch. She could not clearly see the man inside, but she recognized the silhouette immediately. She raised one hand in silent gratitude. The window lifted again, and the sedan continued into the flow of evening traffic without stopping. Neither of them called out. Neither of them needed to. One had sent a desperate message by accident. The other had answered it without asking for anything in return. The club that had chosen cruelty over compassion had disappeared from the city's skyline, but the choice made in a single text message remained. And that day, everyone who remembered the story understood that real power was never measured by the building a man could destroy, but by the dignity he chose to protect.